Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. Today we sit down with Sarah McVicar, who besides being a graduate student at Metro State in St. Paul, has become incredibly active at Mount Zion Temple with their mental health task force. As we wrap up Jewish Disabilities Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, Sarah talks about what Mount Zion focused on this year, how to carry that work through the rest of the year, and how the struggles she has overcome are helping her focus on her future career in this week's Who the Folk podcast. Sarah McVicar, thank you for welcoming us to your home here in St. Paul, and welcome to the Who the Folk podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
So part of the reason we wanted to talk to you is this month being February is Jewish Disabilities Awareness and Inclusion Month.
It's a tricky acronym.
It is. In a world full of acronyms in the Jewish community, everything has an acronym. It's hard to, remember and keep it all straight.
It is.
But so you've become very involved in the last couple of years,
yes,
right, at Mount Zion. Tell me a little bit about what had been going on throughout the month of February to this point about the month and how the synagogue has chosen to use its platform to help educate and inform.
Sure, yeah, well, just to make the acronym a little more challenging, we actually just added the word acceptance. So it's now Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, Inclusion Month. So I've got an extra A, but it's still JDAME. So I have been part of Mount Zion created a mental health task force that was in the summer. So I've been involved for a while now. And then the mental health task force is kind of a subgroup of a larger accessibility and inclusion committee at Mount Zion. And so last year, Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month has been around since about 2008, 2009. And Shelley Christensen, who's actually a member of the Twin Cities Jewish community, was one of the co-founders, kind of originally came up with the concept of having a month for this kind of celebration. And so last year at Mount Zion, we focused on mental health for the month of February. And it was really cool. We had a panel where we had about 6 different congregants who actually shared their personal stories of mental health, whether it was themselves or their family members. And we did this during a Shabbat evening service, and I got to facilitate that panel. We also had a book discussion on the topic of mental health. We had a movie discussion on the topic of mental health. And so that was last February's JDAME. And then this February, Mount Zion is focusing somewhat on sort of autism spectrum disorders. And so we have a member of Mount Zion who actually wrote a play called Autistic License, which was highly regarded in the Twin Cities. And so she's going to be reading an excerpt from that during Shabbat services, and she's going to be speaking. She's a pulpit speaker. And then we have another book discussion, which I will be co-facilitating. So that's kind of this year's JDAME at Mount Zion.
So how do you take the work that the Mental Health Task Force and sort of the committee structure as a whole at Mount Zion, and how do you take it beyond just February? How can you continue sort of the themes that you've worked on this month throughout the year?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And that's actually something we've been thinking about a lot. That was sort of what happened last year. We had a really great month in February. We had a lot of people who came out for the events. We were really excited. People came up to us afterwards and said that it really was impactful for them and that they felt more comfortable sharing their own stories. And so that was one of our goals, and we were really happy about that. But then it's kind of an issue of, February is over. What happens the rest of the year? And it kind of fades from people's awareness. And obviously, if you're living with a mental health disorder or something else, that doesn't disappear after February. So how can we make ourselves more visible and more of a resource the rest of the year? So that's something that we've really been working on. We have monthly meetings of the Mental Health Task Force, though we kind of took a break over the holidays. But we're trying to figure that out. And I should say that I'm also a representative. There's a larger sort of Twin Cities committee that we're different members of different congregations who are working on accessibility and inclusion work meet together and sort of talk about ideas and our challenges and how we would like to move forward. But I think that's really an ongoing struggle. So if you have any suggestions,
if you have any suggestions,
yes,
let us know.
Let us know.
Please. But the inclusion piece of JDAME
yes,
is also fairly recent, right? Because I remember when it was just JDAM. I remember before the I got added to it.
That was before my time.
Okay.
The I was before my time.
Okay. So I didn't know what sort of led to the added parts of the acronym.
I can't speak to the I. I can speak to the extra acceptance because we just talked about that recently. I don't know about the I, but that is another thing, is that's very broad, accessibility and inclusion and disability. And when you think about disability, what does that mean? Because it's not just, a lot of people think of maybe physical disabilities, but it also covers a lot of other things: mental health disorder, substance use disorder, a lot of things that people don't think of. So it's a broad category.
What led you to the mental health task force in the first place? Was it something personal to you, a family member? What sort of brought you, what was the path that led you to doing this work?
Kind of a long and winding path. But so I moved here from New Hampshire at the end of 2014. And Mount Zion is actually the first congregation that I've been a member of. So that was kind of special for me. And so as a member of Mount Zion, I was getting involved in activities. And at the time, one of the committee chair who was very involved in accessibility inclusion work was a good friend of mine. And she said, "Oh, we're thinking of creating a mental health task force." And she asked if I would like to be part of sort of the pilot mental health task force. And then through that work, I got involved in the larger accessibility and inclusion work and the Twin Cities wide committee. But it is personal to me. I have, many family members who have struggled with mental health disorder, and I myself am a person in recovery from co-occurring disorders, so mental health disorder and substance use disorder. So those are things that are very close to my heart.
Wow, that's a lot. How do you sort of do this work, being in recovery, but not, wanting to help other people, but also not yourself getting overwhelmed by the helping of other people? Is that hard?
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing challenge as well. So right now I'm also in a counseling program at Metro State. So I'm in a master's program studying its co-occurring disorders. So it's another acronym. Co-occurring disorders recovery counseling is the name of the degree. So that ultimately means that we'll be eligible for licensure as mental health counselors and substance use disorder counselors. And so we do talk a lot about compassion fatigue is one of the terms that we use a lot, which is sort of what it sounds like. Just if you're constantly trying to help others, it's easy for people to burn out. And so we talk a lot about the importance of self-care. I think a lot of people who are drawn to helping professions maybe are not used to so much thinking about taking care of themselves. So it's challenging. I think it's a matter of balance, and balance is something I'm always working on, but it's not one of my strong suits.
I think it's something everybody works on.
True.
I'm not sure how, I know I'm not always successful at it, as probably my family would attest, but we try.
We try. That's the thing.
So how did you wind up here in St. Paul?
Yeah, so originally I am from New Hampshire. I grew up in the White Mountain National Forest, so right in the mountains, and spent lots of time outside, hiking and skiing, and very beautiful. And I originally came to the Twin Cities because that was at the time when I was looking into treatment for substance use disorder, and Hazelden came up. So the Hazelden, at the time, I don't think they had yet merged with the Betty Ford Foundation. They're now the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. And so my parents and I were reading about the Twin Cities have a reputation for having a large recovery community. Sober city is a term that probably a lot of people haven't heard, but it is a term. And so I was kind of attracted by the recovery community, the strength of the recovery community, and the treatment options that are available here. So I originally came to go to Hazelden in Center City, Minnesota, and then I stayed in the Twin Cities, and I always said I would go back to New Hampshire, and I have not made it back yet. 4 years later.
4 years later, here you are.
Still here.
You mentioned that Mount Zion was the first synagogue that you'd ever joined. What was it about? Was it about the community of Mount Zion, or were you just at a point in your life where you were looking for a synagogue to join?
I think it was a combination of both, as many things are, but I do think Mount Zion it's a special community. There are a lot of things that go on there. I took classes there, and I really enjoy the Shabbat services there. There are a lot of activities, and it was just a community where I found a lot of people who really sort of welcomed me and accepted me, and especially as a person not from Minnesota, so I didn't have my own community here. So that was a place where I found a lot of community, and that became really important to me. So I think that was why I decided to join.
And I think being a transplant myself as well, I think it's one of the things you look for is where you find a comfortable community.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people have said that it's a little hard to find a community as a transplant to Minnesota.
I think it can be.
It can be. It can be anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also sort of depends on what it is you're looking for in a community when you move to a new place.
Yeah, that is definitely true. But I found Mount Zion and the larger Jewish community to be very welcoming.
So how much do you have left in your program at Metro State?
Oh, a long time. This is only my second semester, so it's 3 years.
Okay. Okay, so you're not leaving the Twin Cities anytime soon, at least. You still have a program to
I'm
finish.
now committed for at least another 2 years. Every time I think about leaving, I'm committed for something else.
And so you mentioned you were working as a teacher assistant also.
Yes,
for a creative writing class.
Yes, yeah, creative writing is another one of my interests. So it kind of worked out very fortuitously. I was actually just looking for a job at Metro State, and I saw this opening for a teaching assistant position. And so the class, like you said, it's a creative writing class. So it's called Creative Writers, Race and Identity in the Twin Cities. So we explore issues of race and identity through the lens of creative writing. And it's very interesting. One of our books is an anthology of 16 writers of color in the Twin Cities writing about their experience. So it's very powerful material.
Not being from the Twin Cities, was this sort of a good way to maybe get introduced to the larger Twin Cities community and some of the, issues and challenges that people of color may face?
Yes, you could say that. Yeah, I mean, originally going into the course and the role, I hadn't really thought of it that way. Some of the material, it's very honest. The essays in the anthology, they do talk about a lot of challenges. Because even though there's a lot of great work that goes on in the Twin Cities, there's a lot of great social justice work and advocacy. But at the same time, Minnesota has some of the greatest disparities, income disparities, education outcomes, healthcare outcomes between different races. So there's a lot of good work, but then there are a lot of underlying issues that sometimes are a little more hidden. That's one of the themes we talk about. There's kind of a Minnesota nice, and then there's sort of an underlying, things are maybe not as blatant as you might see in other parts of the country, but there's still a lot of significant issues that are tough to talk about.
No, that is, and I think digging beneath the surface can be challenging for people who don't live in that circumstance, say.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is definitely one of the challenges we talk about. And I think it's also, just in general, it's challenging for anyone to understand an experience that they have not had. We could never actually understand the experience, what it feels like to be someone else.
Right.
And a lot of things, I don't think people necessarily have bad or malicious intentions, but if it's not something you live and it's not something you think about, maybe it just hasn't occurred to you. People are very busy trying to get through their own days, so I think we don't necessarily think about the lives of various other people.
So have you looked into doing social justice work either within the Jewish community in the Twin Cities or sort of the community at large in the Twin Cities? Or are you a little more focused on, you're, again, only 2 semesters into a 3-year degree program and all the work at Mount Zion you're doing as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have looked into it. Yeah, there are a lot of intersections as well between the work. Mount Zion does a lot of great social justice work. I've done some things with Jewish Community Action. I actually had the opportunity to take a course on community organizing and sort of learn more about that. So that was wonderful. I got to meet some great people, including a staff member of TC Jewfolk. At the time, Amelia was there.
Oh, that's right. I forgot she was part of that program. That's right.
So I have gotten a chance to do some of that, and I would like to do more. But at this point, again, it kind of goes back to the balance issue. So there's not a lot of extra time, but I would like to find, I'm always looking for more opportunities.
Well, excellent. Well, last couple questions we have for you. And then we'll let you get on your way to Metro State where you have a meeting, I think.
Yes.
All right. Favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, favorite Jewish holiday. Good question. I have fond Hanukkah memories, I guess. It's not very original, but the dreidel and the candles and the latkes and the songs and
it's Hanukkah. You don't need an excuse. Hanukkah's great.
Applesauce.
Yes. So your applesauce over sour cream?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's a divisive issue.
It is. I'm team sour cream. But
I didn't know that.
I'm the only person in my house.
We can't associate anymore.
I don't think we can. Well,
but I guess I can be friends with your family,
yeah,
though.
that's right. The rest of my family and will get along great with you.
Yeah. But I think it's really, that's what it's about, is spending time with family, loved ones, and community.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
That's what I really enjoy about the holiday.
And favorite Jewish food?
All these questions that I should have thought about in advance. I don't know if I have a favorite Jewish food. I had some really good cherry blintzes the other day. I do like blintzes. I like sweet kugel. I like latkes. Matzo ball soup, kind of a classic.
So you're going with you're hitting all the classics.
Yeah, and I actually like gefilte fish, and some people don't, but I do.
That's a divisive issue too.
It is. A lot of people complain about it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I like gefilte fish, so we're okay there.
Yeah. Okay. At least we're good on that.
We're good on that. Well, Sarah McVicar, thank you so much for having us in your home. We appreciate it, and thanks for joining us on this week's pod.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again to Sarah for sitting down with us this week. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. We're on Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and others. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.